I welcome everybody to the second appointment of our Rome Talk Spring 2025 series. And today I'm very happy to have Brooke Kamin Rapaport. She is an American art curator and writer who served in 2019 as a commissioner and curator for the United States Pavilion at the Venice Biennale. She has been involved in this public art project at the Madison Garden in New York.
Madison Square Park.
Madison Square Park in New York. And I mean, this is basically the focus of our talk, that I find it very inspiring for really cross interpretation from each of the background of our students. Today is also with us Stefano Antonelli. They will be helping me moderating the talk. As we learned 2 weeks ago, it's an expert on public art and made many projects in Rome too. Okay, let's welcome our guest, Brooke Kamin Rapaport.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you, Laura, for welcoming me here today and for inviting me. It's such an honor to speak in this beautiful, beautiful room at Palazzo Taverna. And thank you, Stefano, for your most generous participation. I am so grateful to be here with you both and your colleagues and friends and students, and to share the work that I realized as artistic director and Martin Friedman Chief Curator at Madison Square Park Conservancy in New York City. I am in Rome as a visiting scholar at the American Academy, researching contemporary street murals as part of a book on public art and democracy. And Stefano has been an invaluable resource for this work. Walking the streets of San Lorenzo and Ostiense has been extraordinary. The program in Madison Square Park has some similarities to some of the murals here in Rome. Artists are often invited to create temporary new work. In Rome, it is in neighborhoods. In Madison Square Park, it is on a site in a 6.2 acre or 2.5 hectare public park. People experience the work by plan or unexpectedly. Artists make a proposal for how a project's imagery and ideas and materials will impact shared space. And it's key to work with artists who understand the power and great vulnerabilities to their practice when working in public. This afternoon, I'm going to share some highlights of the public art program and raise questions that circle around publicness, accessibility, and democratic viewing. But I can't imagine beginning today without recognizing a context for this presentation. We are living in and breathing in perilous times. The adaptability and need for civic sites in public parks, on museum campuses, in cities and streets across the countryside has only heightened across these last years, and especially over these last weeks. We need to affirm the role of open space as a necessity for artists and students, families and communities, protesters, workers, and neighbors. Our institutions have been startled on the essential role of preserving and protecting democracy, of understanding and responding to climate change, of defying violent acts of racism and violence against women, and how wars can destroy people, their lands, and their histories. Our role as students and teachers, curators, artists, writers, supporters, neighbors, and our essential power as individuals is to uphold the continued conversation by artists, some of whom use the availability of outdoor space for collective and private reckoning. So how can we take these crushing times and put our practices to work? Threats to humanism and to publicness are heightened now because people have been seized by the times. Public art can carry stunning inspiration and also take on dialogue around politics, culture, and social space because it's out in full view. It's not physically harbored by an institution. And artists who show work outdoors often bring forth work of great nuance from the deepest spaces that reflect the consciousness of what is humanity. Madison Square Park Conservancy's public art program was launched in 2004. Since that time, there have been 50 commissioned projects, 50 artists who demonstrate the soaring range of human creativity and capacity accessible to all. There are 60,000 people who traverse Madison Square Park every day. This is more than the population of residents in Venice. This broad range of eyes and minds seeing their work is invigorating to artists. Commissioning dynamic artists to create temporary new art invites and encourages interpretation from a wide range of communities. There is a sacred but unwritten, even unspoken contract between the artist and the public when a work is installed outdoors, and this looms over every decision that's made. There are practical matters of engineering for structural soundness and resistance to extreme weather, and of acknowledging that people can be hard on works of art by physically climbing, upending, or tagging them, or by calling out work on social media. The public commission means that art is constructed and completed in full view. Typically, the artist and the public, neighbors, workers, out-of-towners, unsheltered people, students, elders, families, artists, athletes, art world people, they see the final work together for the first time during the installation period. And when people intellectually, emotionally, or physically engage on site by posting images online, by leaping from the undulating plains of Leonardo Drew's City in the Grass, sitting on the colorful stools of Arlene Sheckett's Full Steam Ahead, recognizing personal reflections in Teresita Fernandez's Fata Morgana, staring into the past and the future in Paula Hayes' Gazing Globes, enjoying spoken word, music, and dance in Josiah McElhenney's Prismatic Park, or lingering in the mass of climate-starved trees in Maya Lin's Ghost Forest, that is when work assumes complete power. An exhibition by Mark DeSuvero officially launched the art program, and the first years brought work by Sol LeWitt and by Ursula von Rydingsvard. They were art world titans who had been tested for public space. The first projects in the park were largely non-representational, and this became the foundation for the art program, a platform of strength on which to build, reflect on, and evaluate. Over the last 20 years, there have been light-based projects. I'm going to show you some of those. There have been projects based on the figure. There have been film, video, and sound pieces. And performance and social practice. Nature-themed exhibitions. And there have been projects in unexpected materials that tested outdoor conditions. Orly Ganger's project was made of braided lobster rope. Sheila Pepe's piece was crocheted materials. And Ana Maria Hernando's project was made out of a material called tulle. We've also commissioned works with political, social, or economic themes. So last year, for the 20th anniversary of the art program, we commissioned artists who demonstrate a great range of contemporary art making. Ana Maria Hernando's To Let the Sky Know, Dejar que el cielo sepa, opened in January 2024. Hernando creates sculpture in an abundance of tulle, the sumptuous fabric netting, inspired by natural forms and transformed through the sewing process. Across the lawns in Madison Square Park, she formed a series of beauteous atmospheric clouds and a cascading waterfall that floated above and alongside viewers. Tulle is a material often associated with hiding secrets by concealing aspects of women's identity. But the artist, Ana Maria Hernando, daylighted the tulle with her project. Rose B. Simpson from Santa Clara Pueblo in New Mexico realized 7 18-foot-high sentinels in steel for Madison Square Park and Inwood Hill Park in Upper Manhattan. These towering figures reached skyward, and they gathered around a central female figure in bronze who emerged from the ground plane of the park. The figures in seed are in the present while anticipating the future from bronze masks patinated in turquoise. The faces looking in are youth, and those gazing outward are protectors. They all summon layers of narratives, personal and collective human experiences that have seeded Rose Simpson's life and her art. She refers to visual languages reflecting her training as a contemporary artist and as a native artist, building fortitude through this assembled group. Maria Magdalena Campos Pons realized a performance, Procession of Angels for Radical Love and Unity, in September 2024, beginning in Harlem Art Park and concluding in Madison Square Park. The public was invited to participate, and the artist invited musicians and dancers and poets to join her 7-mile journey across 2 mornings. Nicole Eisenman installed a toppled 100-foot-long red link belt crane from 1969 on the park's central oval lawn. Eisenman's sculptures are attached to the boom and cab of the crane, and inside is a tableau, you can see this on the lower right, of an old woman roasting a weenie over a cast iron stove. Eisenman nods to Marcel Duchamp's ready-made. The term Duchamp used in 1916 to describe mass-produced, commercially available, often utilitarian objects that would become a work of art. So Eisenman's ready-made grows to the extreme scale of an industrial crane. She's inserting the machine in the garden, but now the machine is resting like a dinosaur. It's a relic of progress. Overall, the works on view are experiments. We hear from the public loud and clear through interactions on site, anecdotes, social media posts, and emails. And this open interaction and opinion making are hallmarks of democracy, and it finishes the work on view. One of the greatest honors for me was to work with the venerable American sculptor Martin Purrier on Big Bling, his 2016 project for Madison Square Park. Typically, Martin constructs sculpture for the ages with enduring materials. This project was different because he considered it a temporary work. Big Bling was made of laminated plywood and chain link fence with a gold leaf shackle at the pinnacle of the sculpture. This was his largest temporary outdoor sculpture. It was 40 feet high, and it achieved colossal scale and elicited a range of profound interpretations. Contrast and contradiction are embedded in Big Bling. It's stately and overwhelming, rough-hewn and refined, raw and polished, restrained and liberated, figurative and abstract. Martin again realized spectacular work, mostly using many types of wood, and I worked with him as curator and commissioner of the U.S. Pavilion at the 2019 Venice Biennale. That was on the exhibition Martin Purrier, Liberty, Libertà. Here, he brought insight into ideas around liberty, democracy, and identity through sculpture installed inside and outdoors in the pavilion's forecourt. Back in Madison Square Park the next year, Abigail DeVille's Light of Freedom opened in fall of 2020 at the height of the pandemic. After New York, the work traveled to the Momentary at Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art in Bentonville, Arkansas, to the National Mall at the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden in Washington, D.C., and to the Gund Gallery at Kenyon College in Ohio. And Light of Freedom will soon open at Princeton University. The realization of this project took just 4 months from the invitation to the artist in June of 2020 to the opening in October of 2020. This was the most accelerated project we had planned and implemented in the history of the art program, as we discussed the question of how public art can respond to a period of intense turmoil, the presidential election, the pandemic, and the Black Lives Matter movement. So Abigail responded with this piece with her signature materials of objects sourced from many different sites. Light of Freedom is a 13-foot tall reference to the Statue of Liberty. The statue's hand and torch were on view in Madison Square Park from 1876 to 1882, seen in the postcard image from the 1880s. So Abigail filled her torch and flame with a reused, well-worn bell, and the arms of mannequins painted blue. She recognized and hallowed the earliest enslaved Africans who were brought to New Amsterdam in 1626, and she critiqued the promise of American liberty and justice for all. She is a citizen archaeologist. Maya Lin was one of the first artists I reached out to when I began at Madison Square Park Conservancy in 2013. She was not interested initially because she only created permanent projects and she would not plan for a temporary piece. Happily, she called several years later to let us know that she wanted to bring a ghost forest to New York City. Ghost Forest was a towering stand of 49 haunting Atlantic white cedar trees. Maya brought her vision as an artist and her agency as an environmental activist to this project, a memory of germination, vegetation, and abundance, and a harsh symbol of the devastation of climate change. The height of each tree, around 40 feet, overwhelmed human scale and stood as a metaphor for the impact of climate change and a looming environmental calamity. In nature, a ghost forest is the evidence of a dead woodland that was once vibrant. So the trees in ghost forests were all slated to be cleared as part of a regeneration effort in the fragile ecosystem of the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. The next project, Shazia Sikandar's Hava, To Breathe Air Life, was installed in Madison Square Park and on the rooftop of the Appellate Division Courthouse across the street in 2023. Hava means air or atmosphere in Urdu and Eve in Arabic, Hebrew, and other languages. So this work unites female figures and motifs from nature and it confronts symbols of power and justice to examine longstanding practices impeding the advancement of women. In Witness, a steel hoop skirt with mosaic detail adorned a golden female. Her skirt is inspired by the historic courtroom stained glass ceiling dome with its lines resembling longitudinal and latitudinal lines on a globe. Women especially described how they located themselves conceptually and emotionally within the imagery of the sculpture. An idealized golden female figure with arms and legs resembling tree roots, wearing a hoop skirt and determinedly facing forward into the future. We see so few monuments to women, and this work became a beacon. When the sculpture was installed and on view in New York, healthy debate developed on social media, in public forums, and in the New York Times between those who questioned and those who defended the project. Witness became an imposing symbol, and thousands of people experienced the sculpture daily during the months it was on view between January 17th and June 4th, 2023. Hava was then installed on the University of Houston campus from February 2024 through October 2024. The university co-commissioned the project with us. When installation of Sikander's project began there, members of Texas Right to Life and other groups made their opposition with a vocal, physical presence. The artist, her female figure wearing a jabot, the collar, the decorative judicial collar favored by Supreme Court Justices Sandra Day O'Connor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Ginsburg's pro-abortion stance led extremists to equate the meaning of the statue and the artist's intention as pro-choice. That the installation of the work occurred during a presidential campaign where Donald Trump left abortion decisions to the states became heavy ballast weighing on this work. Opponents of the artwork, both students and not, called on others to dispute the sculpture, framing it as a satanic abortion idol. In July 2024, as Hurricane Beryl made landfall in Houston, an unidentified individual ignored 80-mile-per-hour driving winds and pummeling rainfall to scale the frame of Witness's voluminous skirt. They hurled a sledgehammer at the figure's neck, ultimately beheading her, knocking away her sentience, will, gender, and power. Her golden head, with a placid countenance and hair braided in a style that conjured ram's horns, toppled to the ground. Here was a violent example of how popular beliefs and opinions, hallmarks of democracy that centers freedom of expression, were used for justification of damaging a sculptural object. That the work was on view outdoors provided an open arena for this action. And the artist vowed to leave the sculpture on view as is, as evidence of the brutal act. In every way, the debate around works of art in civic space, where people are granted access, exemplify our political moment, swirling around questions of identity and community, representation and history, prominence and power, belonging and exclusion. Calls for installation or the removal of art in public space in our time involve social, cultural, religious, and political virtues cloaked in the safe space of democratic exchange, where artists are commissioned for the power or the beauty of their work, and the public can exploit that to heighten controversy. Context is everything, and approval by the art world isn't necessarily affirmation within the broader population. And the site where a work is installed becomes another crux of interpretive means, on a courthouse facade or in front of a campus arts building, within a public park or on a city street. in a downtown plaza or adjacent to a city hall. And despite the firm grip of our online lives, objects installed in shared space are just as influential conductors for transformation as for rancor. Artists will continue to confront and consider, celebrate and conquer, construct and critique as they create new work in civic space. This is the role of public art. Fundamental tensions that uphold democracy inspire the artists who create new art motivated by a site. And an exhibition that lasts for several months will withstand admiration, contemplation, critique, and even condemnation. In an urban park, the myriad assessments are met equally by the artists and through the public. That's a hallmark of democracy, and it completes the work on view. Artists often sit in the park after the installation of their work to listen to the public response. These are the sweetest and harshest moments. Fundamental concerns arise, questions are tedious and thoughtful, lovers and haters are stirred. That's the glory of public art and the essential urgency of publicness. Thank you.
Well, that was very, very interesting under many point of view. And I think it was also, where you were talking, like my mind was running to the fact that 5 years ago today, we were going to have the lockdown these days. One day, probably a couple of days, probably was the 4th of March, but it was already in the air that our restriction were going to come. And as you know, as you might know, in Italy, these restrictions were very, very strict. Yes. And we couldn't leave our homes for 200 meters. And for over 1 year, we didn't have access to museums and to nature. So people pretended they were jogging, the big, issues. Everybody was like practicing sport because buying dogs to walk them because they just were going to be insane, locked in home. And in those months, Stefano's project, the condominio of Tormarancia, became all of a sudden the most visited place of all Rome, where one day I was there. We had 5 different guided tours with 20 people each. That was the limit that the city council fixed, because nature, art, community, space, they were needed by people. So after that, peripheries, but also these kind of city parks became so important. We realized that, our students come here, they think that the world ends by the Trevi Fountain, and the Romans spend most of the time sipping coffee in front of the Colosseum, which we don't do that. And especially after the pandemic, the idea of a city park as a place for community, for art, because this project really flourished. Obviously the project of Stefano, it's paradigm of this. It's a huge project, but in their own little way, even in my local park, there are like some projects exactly like the one you're proposing, obviously with less renowned names, with different probably budget and contribution. But this idea that nature, art, communities make this word sustainability, resilience, community, genius loci. There is a need. The peripheries were saying, we are Rome. Actually, we are the city. Because that is where people are. That's where people need, Not to mention, of course, so this is the first observation I want to make. The second is obviously we went through an anthology of public art. So performances, long-term art that goes to decay. So really there is a lot of taking. It's really a history, a book of history of public art, generally speaking. So it's really interesting from that point of view too. And then I found absolutely interesting the whole point about the destruction of the artworks. And also the fact that artist uses the the park after the installation to hear feedback from the artworks. That is incredible, because in the time of the social media, that conveys all the good and all the worst of people, but sometimes it's artificial. It's people know that they are going to be read, and so they become more evil or more simp, in order, so they're not really genuine and sincere. The fact that an artist wants to get through and understand, is it really working in the way I plan it, which is unprecedented in the art history, because artists, I mean, they don't know what's going on after that most of the time. So, and but also the fact, especially for the contingent situation that we are experiencing all over the world, in the fact that an artwork can be seen as something to be destroyed because delivers in the image, and this is a very long history. You don't know, I mean, how many devastation has been going through in the name of what art it's capable to convey. But the fact that the artists in this place consider this attack as part of her work on one end, and on the other end, about the fact that being public art, she submitted to the democratic judgment, evaluation, reaction, I want to call it, from the public. You have to imagine, if you do this in a public gallery, you go to jail probably, because if you go in a pub, in a gallery, in a private gallery, in a museum, and you make an act like the one that the statue went through, you go, I don't know if you go to jail, but you get fined for sure. The fact that in the public art side, she considered that part of the history of our work, somehow an extreme, how can I say, part of the poetry that she wanted to deliver. She knew probably that was going, might be, one of the reaction. You living into public, obviously that was intentional, but sometimes vandalism, it's also less intentional. It's
Well,
more,
that was an incredibly courageous decision
yeah,
by the artist,
yeah.
to have that as a visual record of brutality. Yeah.
Yeah, so exactly. And
I,
this is also something that we really should talk about, the power of the images, that is not necessarily a power of persuasion. Sometimes it's just an artwork, even when it stands something that we don't like, bears in itself is exact contrary, also for this kind of reaction. So that will be, I was really, really interested. So I'm probably going to talk a lot about this in the next days. And so Stefano, maybe you want to say something? No,
Thank you. I would just make a consideration and a question. Um, we take for granted that this report was incredible, but this was about art in ordinary life, in real life, and this never happened. This never happened. Art is in a separate part, in the separate spaces, museums, and moreover, this is done with very hard languages for ordinary life people. One of the layers I would ask to Miss Kamin Rapaport to talk about is the understanding, because if you want to people interact, they have to pass the first layer that it's a difficult layer to pass when you enter in a contemporary art museum, is the understanding of what's going on. So this is the first question I would ask. So how this involvement is planned, and the other thing is about the title of her book, which I found very punctual, because all of what we heard is probably public art in public space. I work with public art and public space from a long time, never did this reflection, and it's incredible. So, um, because often we do public art in private space and so on, but this is very important for me. So I would ask some more comments about these two things. Thank you so much.
thank you, Stefano and Laura. So every project, every one of these projects has a curatorial interpretive panel on signage that are placed throughout the park. So people, you would think that people would spend extensive time only on their phones when they're walking through a site, but in fact, they do gather around those sign panels and read very closely. There's also information on social media, and we plan public programs with the artist to interpret or to select themes that the work might inspire. So there are many ways that you can get into the work of art, but also people are smart and you don't need all of the interpretive signage, that people will respond to a work in the best way. And I had up a slide. Fabio, can we go back to slide? Yeah. I wanted to show this to you because this was Krzysztof Wodiczko's project called Monument. And you were talking about the pandemic and the horror of those early days and how people needed to bring works of art into their everyday life in harrowing moments. So this was a video piece that we installed in January of 2020, and it was on view through May of 2020. The pandemic closed down New York City in March of 2020. Mm-hmm. This was a project that was a video projection onto a Civil War monument of Admiral Farragut, David Glasgow Farragut. And Krzysztof projected audio and visual images of 12 resettled refugees to the United States. And they were talking about their experience. So they became Admiral Farragut. Anyway, all that is to say that during the pandemic, this was a space, an open space where lots of people gathered to see that work of art. Yeah.
Thank you. And the other question about your book title, as you had explained to us when we had a little chat before, the
public art has long had a mid-level interpretation. Meh. It's not in a museum. It's not in a gallery. It usually may not be so great. But if you have extraordinary artists who want to work in public space, then publicness can be raised to a very significant level of interaction with the people and with people's ideas and minds and eyes. And the title of the book, Public Art in Public Space, really affirmed that collaboration, that the work can exist without the context of the site.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from the students, from the audience?
Hello. I was just kind of curious, like, obviously this whole organization is about art and letting people kind of speak freely. Like, would you say that these artists as a whole, like their intention is to kind of raise awareness or to kind of create and kind of like start a movement of change, and like kind of like what you're describing with that that statue that got the head cut off and everything like that? Like, do you think that these pieces that are in these public places like creates more of a divide, or do you think as a whole like it kind of brings the community closer together?
I think that the works can be an agent for change or mostly for awareness. And Shazia could not have anticipated that her sculpture would have been beheaded. So that was something that was not intrinsic to the creation of the project. What her motive was at the beginning, she had served on a New York City commission in 2017 that was the mayor had put together on city art monuments and markers to consider removing some of the historic works in New York that were offensive to many communities. And Shazia was part of the brain power on that commission. And what she felt initially from that work was that there were very few images of women in the form of a monument. I mean, she called her project an anti-monument, actually, but that was a way for people to enter that work, and especially women, but many different communities entered that work. So I think that only after the work was decapitated did she figure out that she had to do something, which was doing nothing.
Thank you.
Question? Okay. Yes. One following you.
Hi. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what it was like curating at the Biennale exhibition and how that's different from curating in a public park versus like a private park, where people aren't present for like the installation period. They're only seeing the finalized like gallery.
Right, great, thanks. So we had worked with Martin Purrier in 2016 on his piece called Big Bling. And then, let's see if I can get that back up. This was Big Bling. Whoop. And we applied to the committee for Martin to represent the US for the 2019 Venice Biennale, and were accepted, which was an enormous honor. What Martin did do in terms of publicness and a gesture to publicness was to create a spectacular work that was at the front of the US Pavilion. It was called Swallowed Sun, and it was a complex piece. Let's see if I can. I'll get it. Did it? Okay, this is Big Bling. Okay, anyway, Swallowed Sun was a beautiful lattice-like type front, and then behind that it had a black, ominous, snake-like form with a tail, and that was the artist's way to talk about the moment in our political life and questions of liberty and identity. So he took public space and utilized that in the US Pavilion. And that was in addition to having many sculptures on view indoors in the pavilion.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm a little bit curious about what the the invitation process looks like for these artists. I'm kind of assuming, I guess, that they would give you some kind of pitch before you invite them. But assuming that you get multiple pitches from multiple artists, how do you determine what direction to go? Like, how do you determine what topic to kind of address for the next like however long the project is going to exist? How do you determine what like issue you're going to tackle?
So the artist determines the topic or the themes in the work or what the work looks like. That's not the curatorial purview. This program is a little bit different than others. There's not an open call for applications. It's an invitation to artists. And one of the most exciting things is to work with an artist who has never brought their work outdoors into public space. And that can be very thrilling, not only for the artist and the practice, because that can move their work in really unexpected and vibrant and vital directions, but also the public sees that and experiences that new work and this new opportunity in a public park. So that's a very exciting thing. So usually the artist will submit a proposal after an invitation, and the proposal has to be reviewed very carefully by a structural engineer. And then we have to receive city approval through an application that the work is structurally sound, that if somebody climbs it, they're not supposed to climb it. If they climb it, they won't get hurt, that it won't fall apart, that if there are 98-mile-per-hour hurricane winds, it won't fall over, that the material won't degrade immediately. All of these things are part of the process.
Thank you.
Okay, Paulina.
I mean, this is kind of similar, but like based on that question, you said this is invitation only. So how does like the foundation or whoever is like looking for artists and names decide like what voice you want to put on that stage? Because public art, I mean, has the opportunity to, you know, either present so many different opinions, and the public experiences that all very differently. So I'm like curious about.
Right. So this program is curatorially driven. And the idea is to demonstrate the range of contemporary practice, what's going on today. And that's through materials, that's through themes, that's through artists of different generations, different ideas that come forward in their work. All of that, you want to have a sort of a large overview about the potential for shared space and what that will bring to your communities.
So with a lot of the artwork that you're presenting, do you find that you're creating a narrative and then finding artwork to fit that narrative? Or do you see that as time progresses and the community interacts with the artwork, the meaning starts to change, and how do you adapt to that?
I think when you commission a range of artists, then the program is ultimately going to cohere. And so it's the artists who are determining the subject matter in their work and the materials that they use and the issues that might be raised by the work on view. And then oftentimes you can have a public program that expands on those ideas. And those programs are open to the public. They're all free. Anyone can attend in panel discussions or performance, lectures, poetry readings, music concerts, just, you know, a myriad of ways to take the work in different ways and to different ideas and thoughts that the project inspires.
Any more questions?
Thank you, Brooke. It was a great lecture. And I have a question about Madison Square Garden, the project being such a great blueprint for other projects that could be done like this throughout the States or around the world, especially with the emphasis on play and children. It's often a gateway public sculpture to getting someone interested in contemporary art and what the possibilities can be. So I guess my question is sort of, how do we do more of this? And, you know, thinking about Rome and internationally, how can we be advocates for more public sculpture, for more public parks that incorporate sculpture? And what are your ideas around these sorts of concepts?
Thank you, Amy. So Stefano and Laura are working here around publicness and public space. We'll see what they come up with further. In New York, we launched a consortium of 50 curators from across the country, from across the US, who are museum curators, sculpture park curators, and public art curators to get together annually in person and monthly on Zoom to exactly this, talk about the potential for projects traveling from one venue to another, talk about co-commissioning or the potential for fundraising together. All of these things, and that's a back and forth dialogue that's pretty constant. So that's a way to, you know, to cement some of these projects into other communities. And when a work travels to a new site, you know, when Abigail DeVille's Light of Freedom went to the National Mall in Washington, it just exploded because of the setting had a very different context than when it was on view in New York City. So that also, I think, elevates the work and inspires new ideas around the work.
Okay, I was very amazed by the quality of the questions and really the extent of curiosity that it was raised. And so really, I'm really happy about that. You know, the students really, yes, I'm aware. That's what you mean? Uh, so I'm very happy about how students have been in dialogue with these themes that I think are very much cross reference. You know, for architects, they're very important, but not only for them, I think. And also, I would like this could be food for thought to see cities, also historical cities. I mean, New York and Rome are very similar in that way. So tourism experience should be really of a different kind because, I mean, if I was in New York, I will definitely go in a place like this when I will find absolutely a community, you know, a place that talks about people who live there, art. And I mean, Stefano has always been interested in this idea, art in the ordinary life. And that was the idea of the initial monumentalization of the artworks in the city center, but we're going in the wrong direction. That started gentrification, desertifications of the city center, and so really it's denying the genius loci of our cities. So the fact that I think New York experienced something very similar, you know, I'm a Roman born and bred, and I sometimes don't recognize my city I haven't in the way I was first raised here. And so I think that these kind of projects have in the ultimate idea, not only bring art in the public space, enrich the public space, enrich community, but also give a new angle for city to be alive, not to be just icons of the past. And I'm an historian, but I will say that history should come to life. So I was really, really happy to have Brooke today with us. And I know that my colleague Consuelo Lollobrigida wants to have you again for a class before you leave. And so you'll see her again if you're interested, you know. We will be making the lecture advertised so you can join. Okay, so let's thank once again our guest. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Laura, so much for the opportunity to speak
Thank
to all
you.
of you. Have a good afternoon, everyone. Thank you.